Space. The final frontier.
So I set my course, my battle begins. There's no mistaking this feeling. I feel no remorse, no I can't resist. I'm breaking away.
Well, now that we've done Mega Man March and Resident April, thanks Kane, pun master over there, I guess now, since it's gonna be about 2 days until the Mass Effect collection comes out, I might as well do a Mass Effect May, and we're gonna start out with Andromeda because I might as well get it out of the way. It really is, by design, has nothing to do with the main Mass Effect trilogy. It was meant to be a separate story, completely separate, in a different galaxy, Andromeda Galaxy. So, doing it now or doing it later doesn't really change anything in terms of how I'm going to deliver this review. It doesn't really matter. So I might as well take care of it at the moment to get it out of the way, and then we can focus on the main trilogy once the collection comes out, and I'll start streaming that, and everybody will have a good time, in theory. But, you know, the algorithm hates me, so who knows? Who knows? I might just go cry. I could do that. That's the thing I could do. I could do that right now. Instead of sitting here talking to you people with your demands for content just all the time. How much content do you want? What do you want from me? Okay, I need to settle down. I need to relax. Did I take my medication today? I don't remember. It's fine. Everything's great. Everything's wonderful. Are you wonderful? Are you having a good day? I hope you're having a good day. Let's talk about Mass Effect Andromeda. I hope it'll make your day better by talking about Mass Effect Andromeda. So here's the thing about Mass Effect Andromeda. Oh my goodness. Wow. I remember, I didn't play it when it first came out. But I remember the reaction was, what's the word I'm looking for? Unfavorable. Yes, that's a good word for it. Mass Effect Andromeda did not launch under good circumstances, and in its defense, you have to remember that from the get-go, it was an uphill battle for this game. We're talking about a successor to arguably one of the greatest sci-fi stories ever written, and one of the best sci-fi video games, definitely, by a considerable margin. I mean, Mass Effect changed gaming with its delivery in terms of being a space opera. Like, it didn't have to be tied to, you know, some kind of license like Star Wars or Star Trek. It did its own thing and did it so well that it completely revitalized the notion of science fiction in video games. It changed so much in terms of how we look at how science fiction can be done in video games. It can be done in a Star Trek, Star Wars way without being those two things. It can be its own thing and still be great. Now, Andromeda was a successor to the trilogy, and to begin with, like I said, it had to be as good as those games. And on top of that, myself included, many people were exceedingly disappointed with how Mass Effect 3 ended. The trilogy was basically spotless until that ending, and then everyone hated that. So, it's one of those things where it's like everyone was already kind of in a bad mood, and you're talking about another game in a series that has been known for being exceptional, and Andromeda, when it was released, was in no way complete, at all. The visuals were questionable, the animations in terms of faces were bad, and even now, after patching, I've played the game, and I can tell you that it's still not what I would consider finished. There are many things about it that I noticed that are clearly subpar in terms of what I expect from Mass Effect. The biggest thing I noticed, again, post-patches, so I didn't really run into that many bugs or anything. The game's playable, and actually can be quite fun. I'll get to the good points in a bit. But the one thing I noticed is the Asari, the race of female blue aliens. I guess they're not female. They look female, but they're like, they're monosex. They don't actually have derivative genders like we would consider. But anyway, whatever. You know what I'm talking about. The Asari for the most part, with the exception of PB, who's, your, teammate, they all have the same face. And this drives me nuts, because other species that would be more difficult to give distinctive faces, that we would consider distinctive, like the Krogan or the Taurians, all seem to have more distinctive faces. Like there was more effort to make them look different from each other, whereas the Asari all have the same face for the most part. And this is annoying to me because the Asari effectively have human faces. Like, you could look at their face and beyond the fact that they're blue, they're pretty much, what you consider to be a human female. I will put them in a character creator, your own character creator, give me an hour, and I will make distinctive faces for every single one of these Asari models. Like, I don't understand how this got through the cracks, like how they thought this was going to be acceptable, or how they thought that nobody would notice this. The old games didn't have this problem. All the Asari look different, and it breaks the immersion. It's a problem. And that sounds like a minor thing, but you'll notice this kind of laziness overall when it comes to Andromeda in general. And I don't think that's necessarily the game itself's fault, because in many ways Andromeda is very ambitious and does a lot of really cool things that I actually really like about it. It's a fun game, especially now, again, post-patches. And I actually think if you haven't given it a try at this point, and you're kind of curious, playing it now that all the glitches have been fixed for the most part, and, the animations have been fixed, it's actually worth it just for the good it does, because there's actually good things to find in Andromeda. And this is my thing with Andromeda. I feel like the hate and the toxicity kind of sunk this game early on, when it could have been turned into something that was really great. Modern gaming has proven that it is definitely possible to salvage something that launches horribly. I think No Man's Sky is a case example where, yes, the initial launch was horrifically disappointing, which had none of the content that we were promised, but later, after patching and updates, none of which were, costly for any of us, it became the game that we wanted it to be. And Cyberpunk 2077 is a more recent example where, yes, it launched with a bunch of bugs, but CD Projekt Red is currently in the process of updating it and patching it, and I actually love Cyberpunk, so I hope that it becomes a more favorable game in the public light in the future. But Andromeda kind of effectively got abandoned as a result of the toxicity. Bioware decided to just cut their losses instead of actually trying to fix what they had created. Which is a shame, because like I said, there's a lot to like about Andromeda here. Visually, the game is a mixed bag, I'll say that much. Character models don't really look that much better than what I remember from Mass Effect 3, which is irritating. I don't know why. This was a next-generation title, and when the other Bioware game, Dragon Age Inquisition, looked great, I don't know what happened here. Now, that being said, the environments, the actual planets you explore in Andromeda, actually look breathtakingly beautiful. Like, they are amazing. So, no complaints there. It's just the character models that I feel like could have had more work and made to be a little more next generation. Like, back then, we were expecting something like high-res and impressive, and it really didn't do that in the department. But graphics don't make a game, so I guess we can kind of ignore it, but yeah, it was disappointing. Now, sound design, I will say, is great. Voice acting, much like any Bioware game, is actually top-notch and fantastic, and the musical score is excellent, so no complaints there. Now, when it comes to the gameplay, like I said, Andromeda is almost an ambitious take on the notion of exploration and really Mass Effect as a whole. It does a lot of interesting things that I honestly would love to see explored in a more complete package. First of all, the overall plot is that you are, a member of this ark, well, the handful of arks of various alien species from our Milky Way galaxy that have decided to cut their losses when it comes to that galaxy and try to explore a new one, namely Andromeda, which is the nearest galaxy to the Milky Way, universally speaking. Of course, this trip, even at light speeds, does take about 600 years, so this game is far removed from the original trilogy in that regard, not just by distance, but also by time. There's no way for us to know exactly what's going on with the Milky Way at this point. Like I said, this is an isolated story. And that was on purpose because they didn't really know how they could go forward from Mass Effect 3. I think that was the problem. So they wrote this story that was separate so they could work on something that was Mass Effect and give us something to do while they kind of sorted out what the heck they were doing with the Milky Way at this point, because let's be honest, trying to write past the ending of Mass Effect 3 is going to be a Christmas nightmare. I don't want to do it. I don't even want to do it. Like, it's just like, no. What were you guys thinking? That's a topic for another day. Alright. But you are a Pathfinder. Well, you don't start out that way. Your dad is actually the Pathfinder. You play as Ryder, one of two Ryder twins, either the male or the female one, and their roles switch depending on which one you choose. So no matter which gender you choose, the other one actually will be involved in the story to a significant extent as part of the plot, which is actually kind of a cool feature. I like that. You can actually model both twins and customize them to make them look like they actually are brother and sister. Or if you're like me, you made Ryder look like me, and you made the sister look like my actual kid sister. So, hey, you know, something like that. You know, it's just one of those things, one of those immersive kind of things you can do. Anyway, your father dies saving your own life, and you succeed him as Pathfinder. What is a Pathfinder? Well, according to the initiative, the Andromeda initiative, the Pathfinder is the person responsible for effectively picking the path, choosing the best direction for the colonists to go in regards to colonization and finding a suitable world for people to start their new lives on. Everyone's been in cryosleep for 600 years, so everyone's kind of itching to get out there and live a little, but you find that the golden worlds that you were initially picking for the initiative to live on, none of them actually panned out at all. All of them turned out to be either destroyed or a complete mess or too high temperatures or high pressure. Either way, they're not suitable for your habitation, so you have to find alternatives. And Ryder winds up stumbling onto ancient technology that effectively is terraforming tech that was pre-done so that it would terraform these planets to make them habitable for life. And can we discuss how completely, just insane that is? You guys were screwed. Let's be real. Everyone was complaining, and rightfully so, because they had no place to live and their resources were running out. And Ryder just happens to find that there's ancient alien tech that is convenient and right there, ready to go, prepped for terraforming purposes, something you guys have no way of doing on your own. Talk about winning the intergalactic lottery. That's all I'm saying. I get that that's a big part of the plot in terms of finding out the mystery behind these structures, but what would you have done if this tech hadn't existed? What if this wasn't there? Where would the Pathfinder go? What would you do? Just, look around, hopefully find another planet? What? That's nuts. But again, it's actually a very well-written story otherwise. It's actually very interesting trying to figure out where this tech comes from, who they are, and dealing with the new aliens you encounter in the Andromeda galaxy, namely the Ket, who are the villains of the story, as well as the Angaran, who are native to Andromeda and welcome you for the most part with open arms. There's some skepticism at first because of their dealings with the Ket, but ultimately they become your allies and help you fight. Even one of them joining your own party. Though admittedly, this is where I'm going to throw out another negative because this is a big galaxy. The Milky Way has dozens of different species to speak to and learn from and understand their various differing cultures for. But Andromeda has 2? And it's arguable the Ket may not even be from the Andromeda galaxy because of the way they operate. So I'm like, there's only 2? Are we sure? Did we look? I get that they were trying to focus on more familiar species that we know from the original Mass Effect games, so to try to ease us into Andromeda's new species, but I honestly found it weird that effectively the only friendly aliens you meet are the Angarans. They're the only ones around. So does that imply that there are no other intelligent species in the Andromeda galaxy entirely? I suppose that's reasonably possible. It is possible that intelligent life really hadn't gotten the chance to evolve in Andromeda. I can believe that. But, yo, what? Okay. Anyway, speaking of learning from people, the dialogue wheel is back, which I've always kind of disliked, because my whole thing with the original Mass Effect, and one of my complaints with those games, is Okay, look, the Paragon Renegade thing is ridiculous. It kind of bogs down the experience in terms of what you can choose, because ultimately it comes down to blue or red and nothing else. You don't get to really roleplay or change what you say, because ultimately choosing the red or blue option, depending on whether you're Renegade or Paragon, is going to get you the best result. So why would you bother, effectively shooting yourself in the foot by not going one of those routes? It locks the player into these two sides of the coin, where in reality, morality is a much more gray area. Now, to be fair, the Mass Effect series did start exploring how each side has its various weaknesses, and that there are times where the gray comes into play. So it's not like they didn't answer those complaints, but I think Andromeda actually handles this better by just throwing that system out the window entirely and having a more typical, here's your tonal response, and just, choose your dialogue. It's still on a wheel, but there's no real benefit beyond just choosing what kind of tone writer takes, whether he's joking or he's serious or he's caring. It doesn't really matter in that regard. But I think it helps the role-playing element of the game, because it means you can pick and choose what kind of person Ryder is in a given situation. There are times where Ryder will, be jokey or flirty or whatever, but then there are times where people are dying where a joke doesn't seem appropriate and you get serious. Again, this is just one of the elements to a role-playing video game that I actually like, which is why I kind of miss the just simple list format where you just choose what the character says, and then they say that thing, and then you can go forward, and there's no inherent, necessarily, the benefits aren't necessarily just spelled out for you in terms of colors. It's just, you're playing a character. This is how the character operates. This is what they do. And, the results we'll see. It's just one of those things. It doesn't feel as, shall I say, rigid as the Paragon Renegade system can be, where it's just kind of one or the other. I mean, it's true you can go and play through the Mass Effect games without, specializing in either one of them, but let's be realistic. With the way those games are designed, it actually makes the games way harder if you don't do that. But Andromeda isn't set up this way at all, where it doesn't really inherently matter too much which tone you take. It just, it's just you playing a character, and I like that simplicity. I actually prefer it in this regard. Now, some people were upset that it felt like your decisions didn't matter, but I would argue that to begin with, there are plenty of decisions in Andromeda that do matter and do change the way the game goes. Also, it felt like there were a lot of decisions in the game that actually were planned to set up like sequels. And if you remember from the original Mass Effect, many of those decisions, you didn't necessarily see the results of them until Mass Effect 2 or even 3. So it's possible that many of the decisions you made in Andromeda wouldn't really see a result until it got a sequel, which at this point probably isn't very likely. I'm just throwing it out there. I just don't feel like that's possible. I have heard tale that the new Mass Effect game they're working on is kind of a sequel to both the original series and Andromeda, so maybe it'll take it into account. I don't know, but yeah, direct sequel just seems like it's something that's just not going to happen, and it's cheap. Anyway, as for combat, well, we have something very interesting here, and I'll be real, I actually adore what they did with Andromeda's combat. The speed element is truly here. The idea of jumping around and platforming during combat, as well as doing combo moves and things like that, are actually in play. The customization is actually very deep, and the notion that you can jump around really does change the way the game is played. When you're not in combat, jumping around is just part of the exploration element. You're exploring alien territory, you have no idea where you're at, and having to jump means you can go up to higher levels and you're not as locked off. The maps are very large, so exploring is a big part of the game, and there's a gajillion side quests to figure out. No, seriously, there are so many side quests in Andromeda. I actually think they got a little carried away with that, because there's more side content than main content. Like, people say that there wasn't much to Andromeda, but I can tell you, there were so many side stories, some of which were actually written great, that I think people just completely ignored, which, with the way they get released, I don't blame them, but I'm just saying that they're there and they're actually really good. the idea of exploring and helping people out, it does change the way the game goes, and it gives you new benefits towards the end game. And it's not just running and jumping. You have a new Nomad here that you can drive around, and it actually controls pretty well, and it's actually a lot of fun just driving and looking around these alien landscapes. Each one is inherently unique, with the exception of the fact that there are 2 desert planets, which I feel like was just done so they could show how well they can render sand in this engine. Which, great, nobody tell Anakin. Shooting is about what you'd expect, but like I said, you can jump during it, so there's really no complaints there, but I just feel like everything's been more streamlined and is just faster and overall more satisfying as a game. The old games felt stunted in terms of their approach because it was effectively just cover-based, no jumping, no, very rarely running, just kind of sit there and, cover-based, tactical shooting, which is fun enough. But I honestly prefer Andromeda's method of, easing things off and trying to make the game, more fun and free. It's a cool system, and I actually really like it. Interacting with your team is great, PB is hilarious, and many of these characters are actually pretty endearing if you give them a chance. I heard complaints that people thought that the new team felt like just a bunch of kids just bumbling around, but you have to understand what kind of story we're talking about here. With Shepard, a big deal there was that he was already kind of respected prior to taking command of the Normandy. Shepard was the first human Spectre and a decorated N7 Marine, so he already was in a position where people respected him and followed his orders. Ryder is thrust into a role that he was in no way prepared for, and he's a lot younger than Shepard was. So he has to learn how to be a leader, and he has to learn to interact with people. Many of the other supported characters are actually more experienced than he is, so following his orders can be a little bit difficult at first, but by the end of the game, Ryder actually builds on his experiences and becomes a competent pathfinder. That's a big part of this story, is working your way from the ground up, whereas the older Mass Effect games, you weren't really working up from anything because you were already in a top tier position. So if anything, Andromeda is more like a typical RPG, or like a Legend of Zelda game where you start from the bottom and work your way up. I don't think people gave the story a chance because I actually really enjoyed it. It had its heartbreaking moments, it had difficult decisions to make, it had prototypical Mass Effect stuff that you'd expect from any game in the series. So it's not like the game was missing these components. It just was shipped and delivered in an incomplete, buggy state, which, yeah, that kind of ruins everything, doesn't it? Overall, Mass Effect Andromeda is definitely a flawed experience, and it doesn't really hold a candle to what the original trilogy was and became. It doesn't become legendary status, but I honestly wish they hadn't abandoned it. So I honestly think it could have been something, very near to what we got with the original trilogy. The story is top-notch, the characters are interesting, and ultimately, exploring a new galaxy just sounds like such a cool concept. This is a good idea that I really think should be explored further. There actually was planned DLC for it, introducing species that we hadn't got in the original game, like the Quarians, who were very popular, but all of the DLC was cancelled because of the game's reception, so we're never going to get that, which is really annoying because they actually tease all the DLC in the end game. Like, you talk to people at the end of the game and they tell you, hint at what the DLC is going to be. That's how I know one of them is going to feature the Quarians, because it was the Quarian arc that they found. So the notion that we're never going to get that is kind of frustrating because I really liked what I played of Andromeda. Again, I didn't play it at launch, so I'm in a weird position where I experienced the game after all the fixes, after all the updates, after everything for the most part was corrected and to make the game, playable, which you think would be a given, but apparently that doesn't occur to people these days. I don't understand, but whatever. So I experienced effectively a playable game, and in that regard, Andromeda is actually a lot of fun, and is definitely worth it if you're interested nowadays. I don't think it's one of those games that you can go into and just, you'll hate it outright. Like, the notion that people who haven't experienced it now, that are just responding and not getting it based off of the hate train it got, is kind of a waste, because there was a lot of hard effort and heart put into the writing of this story and the gameplay itself, and I think people would actually have a lot of fun with it if they gave the game a chance. So if you find yourself in the mood for something Mass Effect that isn't the original trilogy, and think that maybe Andromeda might be worth it as a curiosity, I think it's worth it more than a curiosity. I think you'll honestly have a decent time with it, as long as you go into it realizing that it is going to be a little bit different than what you expect from Mass Effect, while still having a familiar sense about it. It was a fun game. I liked it. So, in that regard, I guess you can't hate on it too much unless you disagree with me, in which case it'll be down in the comments being like, how dare you defend Andromeda? You son of a... I hate you. How dare you? You need to take the internet's side in everything, Darkness. All you need to do is puppet what everyone else says and you would be successful. But because you choose to have your own viewpoint on things, this is why nobody likes you. And in that regard, you'd be right. I get that. But I'm not changing for anybody. Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fond farewell.